Good morning. I'll see that we have someone watching us live. Uh, so, good morning. I want to discuss today. Grant is going to visit America until he comes back very soon. Uh, Yosef, you're also leaving America then?
Canada, I'm going on Sunday night.
Oh, Sunday night. So you're going to enjoy the Shabbos together with us
Yeah,
in Mitzvah Ramon. That's beautiful.
yeah.
Um, let's discuss. I would love to, in honor of Grant, to discuss something very, very essential in Chassidus. That Keel for the thumbs up. Very, very good. So I want to share something very, very essential to Judaism, the way Chassidus sees it. And we already discussed this in other classes, the power of action, the power of the simple, that the deepest is expressed in the simple. But now I would like to get to that idea from a whole other perspective. I want to share why, how is Judaism really different than all the other religions that I'm aware of, whereas other religions either put an emphasis on speech or put an emphasis on belief, where Judaism puts a very strong emphasis on the idea of action, and most of Judaism is really action. Even the more spiritual mitzvahs is to understand with our brain. It's a to for us physical people to understand, to love God, to fear God. It's all that physical people should believe and have the emotions towards God. So the truth is that other religions also talk about physical people, but still there's a certain understanding that a physical person in religions in general, physicality is shunned. That's the reason why in other religions women are shunned. Women are why? Because women represent Mother Earth, women represent beauty, women represent physicality. That's something that that is represented by physicality in general is something that in Catholicism, if you're a priest, you're not allowed to get married. In Islam, I think also they say that like femininity or women are only special in the other world. Yeah, that's why if someone dies, that's when they get 72 virgins up in heaven. But in this world, they're considered to be blemished or not blemished. The word is like almost defiled, like problematic, problematic. So where is the difference of what's the core of the difference in the in the opinion? I want to point out that even amongst a lot of Jews, even amongst a lot of religious Jews, the idea of physicality is something that is shunned. In a lot of communities, they'll tell you that the main thing is just to sit and learn Torah the whole day. They perceive a person that goes out and works as something secondary. So obviously, everybody agrees that learning Torah is very, very special. And if a person has the ability, and in general, we should try to learn Torah as much as possible. Torah is our romance with God. Torah is our conversation with God. Torah is to get to know God. God is revealed through the Torah, and so on and so forth. But one of the things that Hasidism did, and we shared this already in our other class, was to make sure that there's no different, how do you say, different social groups, no different social hierarchies, where one group is more is considered higher than the other. Why? Because Judaism, again, from a Hasidic perspective, Judaism is not only about the spiritual. And therefore, sometimes Jews even have this mistake. That's why I think this is so important that in our class we should discuss it, because this will explain to you one of the major concepts in Judaism. I want to connect this too to a major Jewish belief. One of the beliefs in Judaism is that we're going to be resurrected from the dead, right? In general, if you never did this before, I would suggest you should look up the 13 principles of the Jewish faith. One of the 13 principles of the Jewish faith is the idea of resurrection of the dead. There's going to be a messianic era where Mashiach is going to come, and there will be a time when God is going to resurrect all the dead. Now, the idea that this miraculous, if anyone knows what God is and how the whole world runs, I don't think that it would be so so freaked out by the miracle. God knows miracle. If God does miracles, if God knows how to, if God knows how to knows how to create something from nothing, he could definitely resurrect the dead that already existed before. Yeah, God created the world, creatio ex nihilo. But that's not really the point. The problem is that if you say that the ultimate is to be in a body, that's something that philosophers, including Jewish philosophers, had a major issue with it. In other words, like this, Maimonides, that we already spoke about it a few times, that represents, so to say, Jewish philosophy, even though that there's proofs that in his private life he was more of a mystic. And he's the one that established the 13 principles of the Jewish faith. So he's the one that established that one of the principles of the Jewish faith is to the belief of the resurrection of the dead. He by himself writes that that's not the ultimate. I believe, says Maimonides, that there's going to be resurrection of the dead, but then everybody's going to perish. And then we're going to live a spiritual life in the world to come. In other words, like this is something so important. In other words, like this. Everybody agrees that there's going to be resurrection of the dead. But what is the meaning of world to come? According to Maimonides, the world to come is going to be a spiritual life. After we're all going to be resurrected, we're all going to pass away, and then we're going to live a spiritual life in a celestial world. Nachmanides, on the other hand, the Kabbalist, where Kabbalah has the secrets of Judaism, right? Where philosophy is what you understand with your brain, but Kabbalah means receiving. The Jewish tradition has it completely the other way around. Not the other way around, it's just very different. According to Kabbalah and according to Nachmanides, and that's also the common Jewish belief nowadays, that the world to come is a world in our physical bodies. We're not going to be dependent on physical needs because it's going to be so spiritual. So we'll be able to nourish ourselves with spirituality, with a connection to God, and so on and so forth. We won't have to have physical sustenance, but it's going to be in a physical body. Now, let's try to go into the head of all the religious people in the world, including a lot of religious Jews, and let's contrast that with the Jewish perspective based on Kabbalah and based on the fact that most of the Jews nowadays believe that we're going to be resurrected and the ultimate is going to be in a physical body. Do you understand why, from a religious perspective, physicality, being in a body, is shunned? Why it's considered to be problematic? Who could explain to me? Why? Do you understand why someone that is religious, someone that's trying to connect to God, will want to be not married, no connection to the world, no credit cards, be on a hilltop in the Himalayas, not have a woman in his life? Yeah.
That way he could focus on his time. You won't have any distractions.
Exactly. First of all, not have any distractions. But it's not just distractions. Like spirituality, Yosef, spirituality is not considered a distraction. It's because they don't want to be distracted with physicality. And they perceive physicality to be a contradiction with God. Why? And this is something I want everybody to understand. If you don't understand, please ask me and I'll explain it again. In most people's minds, God is spiritual. And therefore, physicality is a distraction from God. How do you say distraction from or distraction of?
Distraction from.
From. It's a distraction from God. Why? Because God is spiritual. I once had it with a neighbor over here. He's a person that really works on himself and he wants to be connected and so on and so forth. I once asked him, like, why are you doing all this? You have to understand, people work on themselves. People try not to give in to their urges. Also at home, in private, they when they want to eat, they won't go for the ice cream. They don't. They try to control their physical urges. There are people that do spiritual work. I don't know if you're aware of that, but there are people. For example, I grew up in a community where there was a lot of emphasis on how to eat. There was emphasis on eating slow. You literally in the dining room. We had all the guys. It was a yeshiva of 300 guys. People would sit with a knife and fork and take food and bring it to the mouth. And if they felt that they had like a really urge to eat it, they would put down the fork. There was like a rule: no one is allowed to bend to the food. I know this is in some places. In some places this is typical etiquette, but there was a strong focus. There are certain communities that, like, from time to time, practice celibacy, even though they're married. People are trying to become more spiritual. People don't want to be bogged down with the physical. Again, because they believe that God is spiritual. And I want to try to claim in this class that is idolatrous idea. It has no source in Judaism.
Like God is spiritual.
Exactly. God is not spiritual. God is beyond physical and spiritual alike. God created spirituality like he created physicality. To think that God is spiritual is a very limited understanding of God. And that's what causes most religious people in the world to have this mistake. Let me show you a model what's going on in the brain of a religious dude. It goes like this. There's a hierarchy. We'll call this model number one. Model number one. There's a ladder. Who's on top of the ladder, guys? God. Who is on the bottom of the ladder?
Us.
Us, the humans. Now, physical is on the bottom of the ladder. What's deeper than physical? Emotional, a bit higher. Intellect is a bit higher. So basically, in life, what you're going to try to do in life, you're going to try to climb the ladder in order to become closer to God. Angels. Anyone knows how the philosophers call angels? The separate intellects. They're intellectual beings. Angels. And so on and so forth. You climb the ladder, you work so hard, you try to separate, you try not to be bogged down by anything physical, try not to have any connection to your wife, try not to have a credit card, try not to deal with a bank, just escape. Go into some ashram. Make sure that you don't own anything. Just make sure that even your pants doesn't belong to you, belongs to the ashram. And just escape. And sit and meditate 24 hours a day, 23 hours a day. I don't know how much. So good? Makes sense? It also makes... I don't want to go into this whole idea of the angels. These people really have a problem with the fact that Judaism is so physical. That Judaism, even physical relations, when it's done in the right in the right setting, from a place of love, not just from a place of animalistic urge, is considered to be a mitzvah. It's one of the ways to connect to God. They're very upset with that, to the extent that you could find some commentators in Judaism that would even tell you that the reason why there's physical mitzvahs is because God wanted the lowest common denominator in order to include also the simple people. But really, you think it's about the tefillin in a leather box with some parchment with Jewish ideas? Really, it's about understanding those Jewish ideas. Really, it's about affecting your heart and brain with Jewish concepts. You understand this model? You understand this model is pretty intuitive, I would say, for any religious guy. Anyone who believes that there's a God, there's a ladder, God is on top of the ladder, we're on the bottom of the ladder, and the lower you go, the more physical, the higher you go, you're more spiritual. This is so common. I was speaking yesterday on the phone to someone that called me to ask a question on Chassidus. I asked them what makes something higher or lower. We were talking about Kabbalah. Her answer was right away, it's like, what makes it higher or lower? Higher is more spiritual, lower is more physical. That's the most common religious, almost default perspective and answer. Right? So there's physicality, mitzvahs, you have to do them. But really, you think it's about the tefillin. Really, it's about the meditation that comes along with the tefillin. And we'll see. This is also very, very important. Comes Judaism, I'm sorry guys, comes Judaism based on Kabbalah and says, wrong. God is not a part of the hierarchy. God is not a part of the world. This is called in Zohar, God is Sovev Kol Almin. God is beyond the world. And therefore, God is beyond the world. What does that basically mean? That both physical and spiritual are equally distant. How do you call it in English? Equidistant?
Yeah.
Are equally distant from God.
Equidistant.
Equidistant. In other words, the small pebble on the floor and the highest celestial world, Chochmah of Atzilus, without going into now what that means Kabbalistically, they're the same in front of God. Oops, I just realized that maybe it's not being recorded. Oh no.
Why, it's not live?
No, he's got his headphones in his pocket.
No, it's live.
Why don't you listen to it back?
I just turned off the Bluetooth.
Oh.
We'll see afterwards. If it's I'm sorry.
But
I just because I left my box in the office. This was in the pocket.
Oh no, I went back in the video and it sounds fine.
Oh, okay.
The audio's good.
Yeah, because if
Yeah.
it goes to your Bluetooth, so it hears you speak.
What?
And if it was in your Bluetooth,
Yeah, yeah, okay.
then it hears you speak.
So maybe it's set in a way that when you record it doesn't matter if you have Bluetooth, it should go through the recorder.
Yeah, it sounds fine.
Oh, very good. Thank you, Yosef. Put in a comment over there.
Yeah?
So let's try to do the model according to Chassidus. What is the model? There's also a ladder. You can't say that there's no ladder. People try to be more spiritual. People are try to be more refined. But why? Why do we try to be more spiritual? Why are we trying to be more refined? Is that because spirituality is closer to God? No. Simply because God wants us to work on our spirituality. These are the words of the Alter Rebbe in chapter 38 in Tanya. Maybe we should take out a Tanya and read those words. These are the most powerful words in the book of Tanya, I think. One of the most powerful. Please, everybody, open up to chapter 38 in Tanya. Yochanan, it's not your ultimate class, right? You'll be here next week? Oh,
I will pretend.
you leave at the 10th. Cool.
Our new friend isn't here. Asher.
Let's open up to page, guys, open up to page 183. I will ask Grant, because like this, you should read a piece of Tanya. We'll remember this voice until he comes back. You see on the side of page 183, you see over there a box and a triangle?
I do.
So-
of the active precepts.
No. Read it again because there was an issue with the internet a second.
Okay.
Again, page 183. Not that the attachment of the...
Not that an attachment of the human thought and intellect to him, blessed be he, is intrinsically superior to the attachment through the performance of the active precepts in actual practice, as will be explained further on.
So this by itself, guys, this line in the Tanya is a nuke. This line in Tanya is something that if you tell it to anyone that studied something about religion and doesn't know about Hasidus, doesn't know about Kabbalah, says, what, are you nuts? The attachment of the intellect and the thought is nothing closer to God than the actual practices? Continue reading.
Rather, it is also his blessed will that
Exactly. It's also his blessed will. So why are you going to make sure to not be so physical? Why are you going to make sure that you don't walk in the street and just check out everything that moves? Why are you going to try to work to be a bit more refined? It's not because that's close to God. It's because it's God's will. In other words, guys, I want to show you what I think the model looks like. Look, there's a ladder. Again, I use the ladder because there's a concept in Judaism of being more refined. So there is physical, spiritual, let's say intellectual is closer to here, emotion somewhere in the middle. But the point is not to become more spiritual. The point is to move to God's will. To get out of your ego and do God's will. So God's will sometimes, Jews usually write it like this. This is like God's name, so we don't want to erase it. So now I also wrote it, also erased it.
it's too early.
The coffee didn't kick in yet.
3-second roll.
Someone would say, okay, I have to cut it out.
Just didn't work. No.
So guys, you understand what I'm saying? What does Alter Rebbe say over there? It's because it's God's will. Guys, in all the classes leading up to this class, one of the things that we repeated over and over again is that according to Chassidus, what is the main point? The main point is unity of God. What is unity of God? That there's nothing but God. The question is not how spiritual I become. The question is, how much am I stuck in my ego? Or I have the ability to let go of my ego and get onto God's turf. Over to God's turf. I could do something completely physical because God wants, because that's God's will. Then I am one with God. I'm one with the only true existence in the world. All the other existences in the world are completely nullified in front of God. Or I could do something the most spiritual in the world. But if God doesn't want that, I am then an idol worshiper. So let's say if I want to meditate now, but God says, no, now is the time for you to go home and be with your wife. The halacha, there's certain halachas, what do you have to do that? So that's the most physical act, but it's God's will. And you say, no, I don't want to do some physical act. I don't want to be home. I just want to sit and meditate now. Who are you worshiping? You're worshiping yourself or you're worshiping God? You're worshiping yourself. That's idolatry. That's being disconnected from God. That's giving yourself, your ego, existence. The whole idea, guys, it's a whole different shift. It's a whole adornment, not adornment, that we call self embellishment, self achievement. It's all about I over here now coming closer. It's either becoming one in sync with God is by doing His will. What is His will? Sometimes it's physical, sometimes it's spiritual. He wants you to work in your spirituality because if you're stuck in your physicality, you're definitely going to be stuck in your ego. If you're stuck in it. But if you're not stuck in it, you're doing it for the right reason, doesn't matter if it's physical or spiritual. You get the shift. Let me ask you a question, guys. Which model makes you closer to God? Or better even, let me ask the question twofold. Which model do you start off closer to God, and which model do you start off further than God, further away from God? And in which model do you become closer, and which model don't you become closer? In other words, where do you start? Where do you have a better starting point, and where do you have a better ending point? Which model? The religious model or the Kabbalistic model? Model number 2. Let's call it number 2.
Model number 1.
Let's first talk the starting point.
Which one are you closer to God at the starting point?
Yeah.
I'm gonna say number 1 because you're on the same ladder.
Exactly. Keela's right. And model number 1, you're like a 10th cousin to God.
That's
Me and
closer
God.
than 2?
Sure. And 2, you're stuck in your ego. 2, you start out as a contradiction to God. The fact that till the age of 13, or when you're a child, you're all focused on yourself, your needs. You can't even see another person. You're like a small narcissist. Not necessarily in a bad way, but yes. What do you think does it mean what do you think it means Kabbalistically that we get our second soul by the bar mitzvah by the age of 13 for a man and 12 for a woman? The ability to care for someone else, the ability to see someone else, the ability not to be so stuck in your ego. Smart kids, even if they're very smart, they have a really hard time to see you. You ask them, you don't ask advice of a kid, even if he's very smart, because it's all very self-centered. Their self is not developed yet, and therefore it's all going to be about themselves. Even when they give you advice, they're going to be stuck in their perspective. Agreed or not, I have nothing against kids. I love my kids. Very cute.
It's true. It's true.
Exactly. So what happens in life? If you really live life and work in life, the ability to get out of that stupid ego, the ability of getting out of feeling myself the whole time. And then unfortunately, God forbid, if a person grows up with trauma or something gets stuck over there in the system, it's harder for them to get out because they constantly feel themselves. They feel their pain, they feel their issues, they feel their shame. They walk into a room or they sit in a room and someone walks into the room, they feel very conscious. Well, how's the person going to judge them? That's what health is. That's the ability to getting out of your stupid ego. And if you're working according to Chassidus, you want to be connected to something higher and greater. And what is the ultimate higher and greater? Is God. So I agree with Keel. Model number 1, you start out like a buddy with God. Not a buddy, I'd say a 10th cousin. You work very hard. You try to make it to become a 3rd cousin. You're a real big tzaddik 2nd cousin. But God is on the ladder. He is the top of the hierarchy. Guys, if you think about this model is the reason for so much idol worship in the world. Because if I am on the same ladder, so I'm also something. Why do you think Pharaoh saw himself as a god? Just for the same reason. I have nothing against Obama, but I once saw a name of a book. I once saw a book. Why does Obama think that he's a god? I didn't read the book. I don't know if it's a person that likes him or doesn't like him. But it helped me understand Chassidus. A god means someone that has unbelievable power. If you happen to be the president of the world, I'm sorry, the president of the strongest country in the world. Sorry for all the Canadians over here. If you happen to be the president of the most powerful nation in the world, you don't say that God is not stronger than you. I think everybody understands that God is much stronger, but I'm also a God. In fact, God needs me too. I'm also in existence. Just like if you work for a boss, right? If you work for a company, could your boss fire you, give you the pink slip at any moment? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Grant, if you work for a boss, could he fire you?
Depending.
He could. He could. Like maybe he'll have to pay a lot of compensation.
Soon.
Yeah, but he could fire you. So the fact that he's greater than you and stronger than you and could get you out of the company, does that mean that you don't voice your opinion?
Sometimes.
Sometimes you do voice your opinion. Sometimes you voice your opinion. Sometimes you even argue with him. Why? Because you understand, even though you're stronger than me, I'm also something. I'm also somewhere in the hierarchy. You're at the top of the hierarchy. You could get rid of me. You could just chuck me out. But I'm not a nobody. I need you more than you need me, but you also need me. So you could walk around. Pharaoh, I don't know much about Obama, but Pharaoh, they weren't stupid people when they said that they're gods. Say, no, Pharaoh is the king of the superpower of the world. So he says, okay, God, we'll try to get along, but I also have an opinion over here. The Talmud says that idol worshippers don't deny God. Idol worshippers call God the God of all the gods. What does it mean, God of all the gods? I'm also a God. Everybody is a shtickle God, yeah? I have my powers, and there's a certain give and take over here. That is the typical thought when you don't think. That's a default. The default is, I'm also something. Obviously, you're stronger than me. You could kill me. You could, God forbid, God could give anyone some cancerous, I don't know what, and get rid of them. Right, you want to fight with me? No problem. But I'm also something. That's really, really the depth of idol worship. The depth of idol worship. Why do you think people worship the sun? Do you think that we're all ignoramus, stupid idiots? Why do people worship the sun? Nowadays, people don't do it, but nowadays we worship Wall Street. We worship the business. We worship the business world. Why would someone give up their values in order to get a good job? What is that basically? What is he saying? He doesn't believe in God. He believes in God, but he believes that the job world also has some power. And therefore, he'll say even more, God, you are the one that created job opportunities. And I understand in order for me to get the job, the job, so to say, the job world has its own mechanism, has power. So back in the day, people would bow to the sun. Why? Because the sun was the source of energy for agriculture. Nowadays, how's it expressed nowadays? By giving up values for a job, or giving up values for a woman for marriage. Doesn't matter. If you believe that something else but God has a power and you succumb to it, so we don't physically bow nowadays, but what does bowing represent? Bowing represents that I put down my head. And you know the famous story of the guy that came to an interview. He learned in law school in a great law school, and he never took off his yarmulke during law school. And then there was a big company that came to interview them. In that school, and he comes in and he really, and he comes into the interview, And for all those years, he never took off his yarmulke, but he thought to himself, again, I'm not trying to push wearing a yarmulke on university. That's not my point. My point is that for him it was a value, and as he walks into the interview, he says, puts it into his pocket. He comes in and he sees them looking around at each other. And I don't know exactly what happened, if he got the job or didn't get the job. But then he heard afterwards, or maybe the story goes the other way around, that he kept his yarmulke on, but he wanted to take it off. They told him that the reason they wanted to take him, it's not for his grades. There were guys that had much better grades than him. The reason they wanted to take him was because his professors said that they saw that he's very, very, very connected to his values. And that's why they wanted to take him. So I don't remember if he ended up getting the job because he didn't take it off, or he lost the job opportunity because he took it off. That's not the point. The point is like this. If I believe that there's other systems in the world, that's idol worship. Idol worshippers never thought that there's no God on top of the hierarchy. The question is if over here too. So I'm also a certain God. I also have an opinion. I also have a say. I also want to develop myself. I also want to do what I think will make me the better version of me. Versus the Hasidic perspective, it says it's not about you. God is not a part of the hierarchy. God is completely beyond the hierarchy. And therefore, anything over here is equidistant. Nothing else has power. This is one big bluff. If you are stuck in your ego, the biggest issue is not that you're physical. The biggest issue is that you're stuck in your ego. And instead of being in sync with God and letting go of your ego, which the definition of God, as we already spoke about in all the other classes, what is the definition of God? He exists and nothing but Him exists. Nothing exists but Him. There's a job system. There's a dating scene. These are all expressions of God. They cannot contradict God. How could God contradict Himself? It's all an expression of God. This doesn't have its own egotistic, independent being. And now you put on tefillin, you become one with God. You become a conduit of God. You become in sync with God. You give tzedakah. The Holy Arizal, the founder of the Lurianic school of Kabbalah from Tzfat, says that when a person gives tzedakah, it doesn't have to be a lot of money. Just get into the habit of giving every day a coin for tzedakah. A dime. The reason why I'm saying a dime is because simply it has to have a certain value in halachically in order to be considered to be a giving. Yeah, it all depends on the price of silver. I don't want to go into that whole thing. It's called in Hebrew a pruta. Says the Holy Arizal that when a person gives a coin for tzedakah, it could be a dime. If you don't have money, if you have money, Hashem should give you a lot of money. You should be able to give thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions, and you shouldn't even feel it. No, that's not my point. My point is just giving tzedakah. Take a dime, says the Holy Arizal, the coin is a yud. Your 5 fingers is the hey. Hey is 5. Your arm is the vav. And the hand of the poor person is another hey. You literally created now God's name. Now, Kabbalistically, that sounds so cool. Letters, names, for those of you that are familiar with a matrix, so you know that the matrix is based on Kabbalah, so it's all about numbers and letters. Cool. But Chassidus explains it in a much deeper way. It's not about the letters. When you give tzedakah now, your hand is now in sync with the Creator. You become a part of the real truth of the world. When you learn Torah, your brain now understands God. You now become a conduit. You now become a vessel for God's wisdom. And God and His wisdom are one. When you put on tefillin, your body now becomes a chariot for God's will in the world. And then it's a whole different perspective. A lot of people in model number 1 are very into receiving stuff from God. oh, I'm going to be more spiritual and I'm going to receive. That's why you can see a lot of people, very spiritual people. There's the most self-centered, egotistic maniacs in the world that I know are spiritual. Did you ever try making a trip, arranging a trip with a spiritual person? Never do that. You could arrange a trip for 2 months. A day before, they'll say, oh, it's not the right energy.
Oh, yeah.
It's all about how they feel. They mess up. They confuse spirituality and just being emotional and egotistic. It has nothing to do with spirituality.
So I have a question. Is number
A second only, I just want to finish the question. So in this model, you're becoming closer to God. In this model, you become one with God. Because you nullify yourself and now you become part of God's being. God's expression. Yeah,
Oh no, actually that kind of answers the question.
I answered your question.
Yeah.
Impossible.
I was
What?
My question is that in the number 2, are you not like moving the plane kind of higher? Like moving the
No,
ladder
you're
higher?
moving this into here. You're moving onto God's turf. You're moving onto God's turf. You're moving your ladder onto God's turf. And you simply, sometimes God wants you to be physical, sometimes God wants you to be spiritual. Now God wants you to stop learning, stop praying, make someone that is depressed, make him happy. In this model, you're always receiving. Oh, I'm becoming better, better, better. Over here, you become a giver to the world. You become a conduit. You become an expression of God's will. You'll talk to people in model number 1. You'll ask them, why did God create the world? They'll always give you answers. Oh, God wants to give me reward. God wants me. I'm oversimplifying it. I don't want to like completely bash, but because there's deeper on the explanations for these things. So I don't take any face value for this thing. You go to talk to people in model number 2, say, why did God create the world? Because God wanted the dwelling place down here. I am over here in order to fulfill His will. And this is the ultimate excitement, the ultimate passion, the ultimate happiness is when you get out of your own ego and you become a conduit for something much greater than you. It's not even about you becoming closer. It's about you becoming an extension, a conduit. You becoming the source of love and light and expression of God in the world. So we want to wish Grant a safe flight home, and he should continue being a beacon of light on his university campus. And we should see you soon.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.